Welcome to Dark Reddit, your late-night escape into eerie calm. I'm Alex, your voice in the dark and your guide through the unknown. This is Podcast 11, a shadowy chapter in our ever-growing collection of sleepless nights. Tonight's journey spans 1 hour and 2 minutes, a series of chilling tales whispered into your ears, softly, slowly, designed to help your mind drift while the darkness unfolds around you. Before we begin, find a quiet, comfortable place to rest. Dim the lights, silence your world, and take one slow, steady breath. Now, close your eyes. Every story in tonight's episode is new, uncharted, untold, and unearthed from the darker corners of Reddit. Tales of strangers, shadows, and things that don't always stay in the past. Let your body grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift. You don't need to watch. You only need to listen. You're safe here. Now, let the night begin. This story begins with an ordinary night that turned into something unforgettable. It was one of those quiet nights when everything felt like it was in its natural place. My wife was out of town for work, and I was in bed, trying to get some much-needed rest. It had been a long week, and I was looking forward to a peaceful night alone. Around 1 a.m., I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps as my son came down the stairs to join me in bed. I barely woke up, mumbling a sleepy acknowledgement as he snuggled in beside me. The night continued, calm and unremarkable, or at least it seemed that way at first. Hours later, I woke up again, not from a noise or a disturbance, but from an inexplicable feeling. My bedroom door had opened and closed, softly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to stir me from my sleep. I rubbed my eyes, still half-dazed, and then saw something that didn't make any sense. A girl. She was walking across the end of my bed, her silhouette faintly illuminated by the soft light filtering through the blinds. I squinted at her, still groggy, and for a moment, I thought it was my daughter sleepwalking. She had done that before, wandering the house in the dead of night, her movements slow and uncoordinated, as if her body was still trying to wake up while her mind remained somewhere else. This girl, though, was different. She wasn't my daughter, at least not in the way I expected. I looked at her reflection in the mirror across the room, and that's when I noticed the details that didn't quite match. She had shoulder-length brown hair and was wearing a red sweater. My daughter didn't own anything like that. Still, I assumed it was her. Maybe she had found a new sweater I hadn't seen before. The clock on the nightstand read 3 a.m. As I lay there watching her walk, she seemed to glide effortlessly across the room, crossing the end of the bed and heading toward the bathroom. I called out my daughter's name, but she didn't respond. The girl didn't even turn toward me. She just kept walking, moving with a strange kind of precision, like she was in some kind of trance. I watched her until she reached the bathroom doorway. Then she stopped and stood there, perfectly still. Her arms began to rise slowly, at first just a little, and then more until her arms were stretched straight out to either side, like she was balancing on an invisible beam. A chill ran through me. I called my daughter's name again, louder this time, the panic starting to rise in my voice. This time, my son woke up, startled, and I saw his eyes widen as he too saw the girl standing there, motionless, her arms stretched out unnaturally to the sides. "Dad?" my son whispered, his voice laced with confusion and fear. I shot out of bed in an instant, flicking on the light. The moment the light flooded the room, the figure vanished. There was no trace of her, no sign of anyone having been there, just emptiness. I was shaking, my heart pounding as I looked around the room, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The bathroom was empty. There was no one in the hallway. I walked upstairs, heart still racing, and found my daughter fast asleep in her bed, completely unaware of the strange occurrence downstairs. Confused and unsettled, I went back down to the living room and stood exactly where the girl had been. The floor was warm to the touch, noticeably warmer than the rest of the room. I shivered, even though the rest of the house felt cold. It was as if whatever had been there had left its imprint on the space, something that still lingered in the air. I eventually crawled back into bed, trying to rationalize what had just happened. But the unease wouldn't leave me. I lay there for nearly 45 minutes, wide awake, unable to sleep. The images of the girl, her arms outstretched, the emptiness of her figure, kept replaying in my mind, every detail like a strange puzzle piece I couldn't fit together. The next morning, I sat down with my son and tried to gently ask about the events from the night before, half expecting him to brush it off as a dream. But to my surprise, he looked at me with wide eyes. "I remember it, Dad," he said, his voice quiet. I woke up and saw her standing in the doorway, wearing a red sweater. It was so weird. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. He remembered it too. The two of us sat there in stunned silence, the realization settling in. We had both seen the same thing at the same time. Neither of us had said anything the night before, but now we both knew. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't just my imagination. I'm still trying to make sense of what happened that night. The girl in the red sweater, the way she moved, the way she stood still in that doorway with her arms outstretched. It felt wrong. It felt like something wasn't just out of place, but that we weren't meant to see it. Whatever it wasn't human, and it wasn't something I could easily forget. I don't know what we saw that night, but it has haunted me ever since. And now, when I go to bed, I can't help but wonder, will I ever see her again? Now, next up, let's hear a story about what happened when curiosity led to fear. This story takes us to the Algarve, the sun-drenched southern coast of Portugal, where a family vacation home held a secret far darker than anyone expected. Back in 2012, I was 12 years old. Every summer, my cousin, my mom, my aunt, my grandparents, and I would retreat to a beautiful house my grandfather designed himself. The place sat isolated, far from the nearest neighbors, with just a fenced property, dry terrain, and miles of silence. Despite the warm weather and family memories, I always felt off about that house, like something about it just didn't sit right. And every summer, without fail, I would have the same nightmare. In the dream, masked men in black would invade the property. My cousin and I would try to escape, running through the yard to get help. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, but chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Still, the frequency of it never let up. That summer, the nightmare returned again. Only this time, it lingered. I felt a kind of paranoia that clung to me. Something about the dream felt less like a dream and more like a warning. I told my family I wanted to check the fence line. I might have said I was looking for a broken section, or maybe I was just upfront. I don't remember. Either way, they let me and my 9-year-old cousin explore, so long as we didn't go far. It was over 40 degrees Celsius out, so I grabbed a water bottle and my little Swiss Army knife, just to feel brave, and we set off. To the right of the property stood the ruins of an old house. Nothing but caved-in roof and crumbling bricks. We glanced at it, lost interest, and kept moving. Everything was normal. We played around a small creek, found some sugarcane, laughed like kids do. The tension faded, and for a moment it felt like just another summer day, until we came back toward the gate. That's when I saw something white catching the sunlight. It looked like it was perched on a stick, maybe 20 to 30 meters from the fence. I walked closer, then I stopped cold. A goat's head, half decomposed, sun-bleached and leathery, impaled. I didn't know what ritual sacrifice was at the time. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but I knew, deep down in my bones, that something was very wrong. I told my cousin to run. We bolted back to the house and told the adults everything. They went to check it out, and when they came back, they didn't want to talk about it. Years later, my mom finally explained. Yes, the skull was there, but what they hadn't told us was that melted candle wax had been found around it, in a perfect circle, the kind used in occult rituals. That wasn't all. She admitted they had often seen patches of grass flattened in full circles around the property, like a group had been sitting there, dozens of times, never knowing why. Eventually, we had to sell the place for financial reasons. But truthfully, I didn't miss it. The feeling of being watched, even in the daytime, had never gone away. I remember going out to swim or walk and just feeling exposed, like eyes were always on me. We had metal shutters on every window, and every night they were shut tight. Looking back, those recurring nightmares don't feel random anymore. It was always the same thing. Men sneaking in, trying to hurt us. I think my subconscious was trying to warn me. Maybe when I was younger I saw something. Maybe my mind buried it deep. All I know is that the nightmares stopped the year we sold the house. And I didn't think about it for a long time. But sometimes I wonder about the people who bought the place. And I really, really hope they never find the things we did. As you breathe deeper and sink into sleep, his next Reddit tale may just make your skin crawl. Next up is a tale from a family home that's seen more than its fair share of strange happenings. My family lived in an old house in western Massachusetts, one built well before 1865. It had that timeless, almost forgotten charm, with creaky floors and walls that seemed to carry the weight of 100 years of stories. My bedroom was connected to my siblings' room by a door that led straight into theirs. An odd feature, but one we'd grown used to. There were plenty of nights when one of us would wake up and wander into the other's room, whether for company or just because it was more comforting than being alone in a dark house. But there was one night, one single moment, that changed everything for me. I was around 12 years old, and it was well past midnight. The house was quiet, too quiet, with only the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. I woke up, feeling a sudden need to use the bathroom. I sat up in bed, rubbed my eyes, and turned to get out when I noticed something. No, someone. Standing at the foot of my sister's bed. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I had just woken up, and it was possible that I had something stuck in my eyes, or maybe my brain was still tangled in the haze between sleep and wakefulness. I convinced myself it was just the shadows, nothing more. So I calmly closed my eyes again and rubbed them, thinking that when I opened them, the figure would be gone. But when I opened my eyes again, There it was, still standing at the foot of my sister's bed, clear as day. The figure was tall, its shape almost human but somehow not quite right. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, like it was filled with something I couldn't name. My heart began to pound in my chest as I stared at the figure, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I thought, maybe I had just imagined it, that maybe I was still half asleep, but the figure didn't go away. I didn't know what to do. I froze for a moment, the terror rising in my throat, but then something inside me urged me to act. I stood up from my bed, my feet barely making a sound on the old wood floor. I hesitated but finally mustered the courage to speak, my voice shaky as I whispered, "Hey!" To my horror, the figure turned around, and for a brief second, I could swear it looked surprised, almost startled. Its features were hard to make out in the dark, but I could feel its gaze, something cold and distant in the air between us. And just as quickly as it had appeared, it moved out of view, its shadow vanishing toward the upstairs hallway. I was frozen in place for a few moments, unsure of what to do. But then, my instincts kicked in, and I bolted for my sister's room, heart racing in my chest. When I reached her room, I glanced around quickly. Nothing. The figure was gone. I rushed into the hallway, hoping to see someone, anyone, to make sense of the experience. But there, standing at the top of the stairs, was our dog. It wasn't barking, but it was staring intently down the hallway, its head tilted in that way dogs do when they're confused or curious. The way it looked, like it was seeing something I couldn't, made my skin crawl. I stood there, in the dim light of the hallway, my mind reeling. I tried to call out to the dog, but I couldn't make sense of anything that had just happened. The figure, was it a person? A ghost? Some kind of trick of the light? And why had the dog reacted so strangely, staring at something that clearly wasn't there? My thoughts were racing as I moved closer to the dog, but the hallway was still and quiet. There was no trace of the figure, no explanation for what I had just witnessed. I stayed there for a long moment, staring down the dark corridor, waiting for something to give me an answer, but nothing came. Eventually, I went back into my room, the door creaking shut behind me. I never saw the figure again. I tried to convince myself that it had been a figment of my imagination, some trick of my mind in the dead of night. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. There was something in that hallway, something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that made my heart race and my skin prickle with unease. And while I never spoke about it to my parents or my siblings, I knew that whatever it was, whatever I had seen, was still a part of that house. Years have passed since that night, but the memory of it has stayed with me. I've often wondered if others who lived in that house experienced similar things, or if it was just me. The house, with its creaky floors and old windows, still stands, an imposing presence in the quiet neighborhood. I've since moved away, but every time I think back to that night, I feel that same chill, that same inexplicable sense of dread. What was it? Who or what was standing at the end of my sister's bed? And why was the dog looking down the hallway at something I couldn't see? I may never know, but one thing's for sure. That night left an imprint on me that I can never quite shake. Our next story is about a moment that may have been fate, or perhaps something even stranger. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon when I sat in my car, about to leave my apartment complex. The parking lot was quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I had a meeting to get to, and I was already running late. The keys were in the ignition, my foot pressing gently on the gas pedal, when my phone rang. I glanced down at the screen. The number was unfamiliar, a random string of digits with no area code I recognized. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Telemarketers, robocalls, and random wrong numbers had become an annoying part of my daily routine. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the oddity of the call, or maybe it was that nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I decided to answer. "Hello," I said, holding the phone to my ear. There was only silence on the other end. No one spoke, no static, just empty, dead air. I frowned and pulled the phone away, ready to end the call and move on. But then I heard something, a faint click, like the line had been disconnected. I shook my head. Weird. I couldn't even recall the last time I had a call with no voice on the other side. I hung up and threw the phone into the passenger seat, rolling my eyes at the inconvenience. Maybe it was just a misdial, but who knew? The world was full of strange coincidences. I pressed the gas pedal again, and my car slowly rolled out of the parking space, making its way toward the exit. The street outside my apartment complex was typically busy, but at this time of day, it usually flowed smoothly. I was just about to turn onto the main road when I noticed a flash of blue and red in my rearview mirror. A police car, then a fire truck, and an ambulance, all speeding down the same road I had planned to take. I watched as they all raced past, the sirens blaring, my heart dropping into my stomach as the traffic started to slow. I wasn't sure why, but something in the pit of my stomach told me something wasn't right. I looked down at the street again, and my eyes widened as I saw the flashing lights further down, just before the intersection I would have been crossing if I hadn't been delayed. Suddenly, the world seemed to slow down around me. I watched, frozen, as I saw the commotion up ahead. A crash had occurred. Two cars collided. One flipped onto its side, and a crowd had gathered. The first responders were already rushing in, but I could see the wreckage from where I sat. The intersection was blocked off with yellow tape, and people stood around in a daze. My heart pounded in my chest. It was only then that it hit me. That could have been me. I had been less than 5 minutes away from being on that road. I had been seconds away from turning onto the same intersection where the crash had just happened. But for some reason, I had answered that strange call. For some reason, I had hesitated. I thought it was nothing more than an annoyance at the time, but now it felt like fate or something more had intervened. I sat there, in the parking lot, staring at the scene unfolding in front of me. A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, guilt, confusion, and awe. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Had I just been lucky, or had something beyond my understanding prevented me from going forward? I stayed in the parking lot for a while, unable to tear my eyes away from the flashing lights and the chaos. My mind raced with questions. Why had I gotten that call? Why had I answered it? And why, in that moment, had I felt so compelled to pause? I never got an answer to those questions. But what I did know was that I had been spared from something terrible. something I couldn't fully explain. As the emergency vehicles slowly began to clear, I finally made my way out of the parking lot and onto the road, taking a different route to my meeting. The world felt different, like I had been given another chance, or perhaps saved from something that could have changed my life forever. To this day, I don't know if it was divine intervention, a twist of fate, or simply a stroke of luck. But one thing was for sure, I wasn't taking any more chances when it came to strange calls, especially the ones that seemed to come at just the right moment. Sometimes, I think about that day and wonder how many other moments in life go unnoticed, how many times we've been nudged in one direction or another, guided by forces we can't fully comprehend. It's a mystery I may never solve, but one thing I've learned for sure: some things, whether we believe in them or not, happen for a reason. Ready for another? This tale takes us into the unknown, submitted by a Reddit user who never looked at their house the same again. I had just finished a long day and was in the mood to unwind. My go-to method of relaxation? Cranking up the volume on my stereo and letting the music take over. It's how I cope with the chaos of life. Blasting my favorite tracks, dancing around the house, and letting go of everything else. But this time, things didn't go according to plan. What I thought was going to be another carefree night of music and dancing turned into an experience that would haunt me for months to come. It all started with me dancing around my living room, enjoying the loud, thumping beats of my favorite homesick song. I was by myself in my element, feeling completely at peace with the music and the solitude. I glanced up at the TV, which was mounted high on the wall opposite me. It was a habit of mine, taking the occasional break from dancing to gaze at the screen, as though it could offer me some sense of connection with the outside world. But then something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, a figment of my imagination amplified by the music. I saw two figures standing on either side of the archway that led into my kitchen. They were only half visible, just silhouettes in the dim light, but there was something about them that made my stomach churn. They weren't supposed to be there. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But the more I looked, the more the figures seemed to shift, as if they were moving just outside my vision, making it hard to get a solid grasp on what was happening. It was like they were standing still, but at the same time, they seemed to be dancing. The movement was subtle, like someone lightly swaying to the music in the background. But they weren't supposed to be there. I was alone. My heart began to race. Was I just seeing things? Was I so immersed in the music that I had convinced myself there were people standing in my doorway? My mind scrambled for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. I had to know for sure. Without even thinking, I grabbed my phone and started recording. I wasn't sure if I was capturing anything, but I had to try. I panned the camera toward the doorway, trying to steady my shaking hands as I filmed what I thought was just a strange trick of the light. I continued recording for a few more seconds before stopping. I was still unsure of what I had seen, but I had to at least try to look back at the footage. My mind was racing, trying to put logic to what had just occurred. Once I brightened the video and played it back, I was hit with the truth. The figures I thought were standing in the doorway weren't just two people. The video revealed a much larger group, more than I could count, packed into the small space in the archway. And they weren't just standing still. They were dancing. They were having a freaking party. I could hardly breathe as I watched the footage play. The figures weren't clear, not in the way you'd expect people to look. No faces, no distinct details, but the movement, the way they shifted and swayed, was unmistakable. It was like a scene pulled straight out of an eerie movie. But this was real. This was happening in my house. I sat there frozen, watching the video over and over, unable to believe my eyes. There was no mistaking it. I had captured something that was beyond explanation. The figures in the doorway weren't just any figures. They were dancing, moving to a rhythm only they could hear, and they were crammed into the space like a gathering of spirits. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a weird camera glitch, or some optical illusion caused by the low lighting. But deep down, I knew better. There was something undeniably strange about what I had just witnessed. I wanted to share the video with others, but without the ability to upload videos here, I could only describe it to people. I hoped that in some other community I could post it, where others might be able to offer an explanation or even share similar experiences. The thought that I wasn't alone in this, perhaps there were others out there who had witnessed something similar, was the only thing that gave me any comfort. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, the music now silenced, I couldn't shake the feeling that something in my house had shifted. It wasn't just the eerie party of figures caught on video. It was the overwhelming sense that I had opened a door to something that was always there, lurking just beyond the veil. I don't know what to make of it, but one thing is certain. Whatever I captured on that video, whatever those figures were, they weren't meant to be seen. I'll never look at that archway the same way again. And I can't help but wonder if the party they were having was for me. An invitation I never asked for, but somehow couldn't avoid. As you breathe deeper and sink into sleep, this next Reddit tale may just make your skin crawl. Today, my friend and I decided to take our kids downtown. It had been a while since we spent the day out and about, and we were looking forward to seeing some of the city's sights. After a fun walk around, we stopped at a local restaurant to grab lunch. The place wasn't anything special, just a small, non-chain restaurant with an inviting atmosphere. But it was perfect for a relaxing break in the middle of our day. We were sitting there, enjoying our meal, when my 10-year-old daughter, who was quietly eating, suddenly looked up at me with a strange expression. It wasn't fear or anxiety, just a kind of bewilderment, as if something heavy was on her mind. She leaned in close to me and whispered, "Mom, I can see the future." At first, I thought she was just being dramatic, but then she continued. She explained that, in her mind, she had already seen the exact scene we were experiencing. She described how she had seen herself, her brother, and her friend all sitting at the same table in the same restaurant, with everything exactly as it was in that moment. The patterns on the walls, the arrangement of the tables, even the hum of conversations in the background. Everything. And here's the kicker. She had never been to that restaurant before. It wasn't a place we'd visited, nor was it a chain we could have seen advertised anywhere. Yet she was certain she'd seen it all before. I was trying to wrap my head around what she was saying, but she wasn't done. After a pause, she continued with another story, one that sent a chill down my spine. She said that, before we even moved into our current house, she had seen herself in our neighborhood. This wasn't just a vague memory or a déjà vu moment. She described playing with the neighbors, kids she had never met, playing foursquare in the exact spot she had envisioned. She even told me about the street, the houses, and how everything felt so familiar. I tried to explain déjà vu to her, Perhaps it was just a weird sense of familiarity, but she was insistent. No, it wasn't déjà vu. It wasn't a dream either. She had seen the whole thing clearly in a picture in her head. I can't help but wonder, what does this mean? The more she talked, the stranger it felt. Could it be that her imagination was running wild? After all, she has a pretty creative mind, and kids often come up with wild ideas. But this wasn't like her usual imagination. She seemed so certain, so convinced that what she had seen was real. It wasn't something she was making up on the spot. It was something she had known for a while. Something that happened in her mind before it happened in real life. She mentioned that these two incidents were the only time she had ever felt this way, and today was the first time she ever told me about it. I asked her if she thought maybe she'd had these visions in a dream or a daydream, but she was clear that it wasn't that. She didn't know how to explain it. She didn't know if she was just imagining it or if something more was at play. I'm left wondering whether there's something more to this than just a child's creativity or imagination. I have to admit, the more I think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. It's hard to shake the feeling that something bigger might be happening here. I can't help but wonder if this is a form of intuition, or maybe something even stranger. Has anyone else had their child say something like this? Or is it just my daughter's big imagination? I can't help but think that there's more to it, something I'm not seeing. What's even stranger is the fact that my daughter doesn't seem scared by it at all. She's matter of fact, like it's completely normal to see the future in your mind. And if that's the case, where does it stop? Is this just a fluke? Or could there be more to it than meets the eye? Could she truly be seeing events before they happen? I don't know, but for now, I can't stop thinking about it. Now, let's hear what happened when curiosity led to fear. It all started after my friend passed away, and I had to attend the funeral. It was a heartbreaking day, but one that we all go through, paying our respects and grieving. The funeral was tough, but after it was over, I tried to go back to some semblance of normalcy. My mom, however, who's a bit on the superstitious side, gave me one of her usual requests. She called to tell me to take a bath before going to bed that night, as she always does whenever there's been a death. Her reasoning is that it's to wash away any bad energy or lingering spirits that may have attached themselves to you. At first, I always thought it was just one of her quirky traditions, a way of dealing with grief and the unknown. But that night, after the funeral, things started happening that made me question it all. The following evening, I was in my room, just relaxing on the bed, thinking about everything that had just transpired. The room was quiet, and the atmosphere was heavy, with that lingering sadness that tends to sit in the air after a funeral. My mom called again around 6 or 7 p.m. to check on me. She was upset, though, more than usual, ranting about how I shouldn't have gone to the funeral at all. I couldn't understand why she was so adamant about it, but she was firm in her words, saying there was something wrong about the whole situation. I let her talk, though, because, well, that's what she did. As she was speaking, something incredibly strange happened. My door, which I was sure had been left open, slammed shut all of a sudden. The sound was loud, and I immediately jumped. I thought at first it was the wind, some draft pushing it closed, but when I glanced over, I realized my windows were tightly shut. The air was still, not a single gust of wind, so there was no logical explanation for what had just happened. I mentioned the door slamming to my mom, but as I did, the phone line began cutting out. It was as if the connection was being disrupted. The sound of her voice became muffled, and there was a weird static that filled the space between us. I could still hear her faintly, but she couldn't hear me properly, no matter how many times I tried to speak. It was as if something was interfering with the call. I remember sitting there, staring at my phone, trying to get the call to clear up, but it was futile. I could hear her on the other end, but it felt like the distance between us had somehow expanded. There was this eerie, almost suffocating silence between the static. My mom was telling me that she could barely hear me, and I kept asking her if she was okay, wondering why the call kept cutting out. I couldn't explain it, and I could tell she was unnerved too, but she didn't want to panic me. Once the call finally dropped entirely, I sat there for a few moments, frozen. That feeling of something being off didn't go away. The door slamming, the static-filled phone call, the oddness of it all. It felt wrong. I got up and walked around the room, trying to shake the unease, but the feeling lingered. The next night, things started getting even stranger. I was just sitting in my room again, doing my usual thing, when I noticed the light flicker on its own. It wasn't a usual flicker like a light bulb going bad. It was as if the light had just decided to turn on for no reason. I figured maybe it was just a random glitch with the electrical wiring, but then it happened again a few minutes later. It was like the light had a mind of its own, and that sense of something not quite right, that eerie vibe, just grew stronger. Then, a couple of days after that, another odd occurrence. My phone's volume randomly turned itself down, and I was left sitting there, wondering how the volume had lowered. I had been using it earlier and hadn't touched the volume buttons, but somehow, it had just adjusted itself. At first, I told myself it was just a technical glitch, but deep down, I knew it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. All these little things were starting to add up, and it was becoming harder to brush them off as mere technical issues. I kept all of this to myself for a while, but it was really starting to bug me. Was I imagining it all? Was there something going on with the electronics? But then I realized that everything seemed to be happening right after the funeral, and it felt like more than just strange coincidences. There was this feeling of energy in the air that I couldn't shake. One night, as I was lying in bed, trying to rationalize what was going on, I found myself getting more and more unsettled. The events of the last few days replayed in my mind, and I thought back to how my mom had insisted I shouldn't have gone to the funeral. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was something to her superstitions, something I hadn't taken seriously enough before. After all, the door slamming shut on its own, the weird phone call, the electrical oddities, none of it seemed easily explained. I called my mom again to tell her what had been happening, and she listened, sounding worried. She asked me if I felt like something was with me, and it hit me that I hadn't really felt alone at all during all of this. There was this presence, a sense of being watched, like something unseen was lingering just out of view. I felt it, but I couldn't name it. It wasn't a feeling of fear exactly, but more like a warning, like something was trying to make itself known. I'm not sure what to make of it all, to be honest. On the one hand, I could convince myself it was all just a series of strange coincidences, technical problems, and my mind playing tricks on me. But on the other hand, the timing right after the funeral, and the events that seemed to coincide with it, make me wonder if there's something more to it. So I'm reaching out here, hoping someone can offer a bit of insight. Has anyone else experienced strange occurrences like this after a funeral or a major loss? Could it be something as simple as stress manifesting in odd ways, or could there be something more supernatural at play? I'm still trying to figure it out, but it's hard to ignore the strange coincidences and the unsettling feeling that's been following me around since that night. As you breathe deeper and sink into sleep, this next Reddit tale may just make your skin crawl. It was just another quiet night in the sprawling mansion, the kind of silence that seems almost unnatural, thick and heavy in the air. I was sitting in the living room, watching the flicker of the baby monitor that sat on the table beside me, keeping an eye on my client, Mr. Peterson. He was sleeping in his room upstairs, as he did every night. My job was simple: stay awake, make sure he didn't get up and wander, make sure he didn't fall. He had dementia, and for the last 6 months, I had been his overnight caregiver, tasked with ensuring he stayed safe in his own home. It was a routine, but not one without its strange moments. That night, the house seemed unusually still. Even the creaking of the old floors seemed to have been swallowed by the vast, empty space of the mansion. I tried to focus on my book, the pages barely rustling in the silence, but my eyes kept drifting to the baby monitor and the still image of Mr. Peterson sleeping soundly in his bed. It was 11:11 p.m. when it happened. I'm not sure what made me look at the monitor at that exact moment. Maybe it was the fact that everything felt so unsettlingly quiet, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, trying to distract from the eerie calm of the house. But as soon as I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. The blankets on Mr. Peterson's bed, which had been neatly tucked around him, began to lift. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or some glitch in the monitor. But no. There they were, the blankets, rising slowly into the air, as though invisible hands were gently lifting them up. They hovered for a moment, suspended just above Mr. Peterson's body, and then, just as suddenly, they fell back down. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, unsure of what I had just witnessed. The room on the monitor was still. Mr. Peterson didn't stir, didn't wake up. He was oblivious to whatever had just happened. I leaned forward, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Could it have been a draft? There were no open windows in his room, and his door was closed. It didn't make sense. A draft couldn't do that, and yet, there was no explanation for what I had just seen. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was probably just a glitch, or perhaps I had imagined it. After all, I had been alone in this massive house for hours, and the silence was starting to get to me. The house was so quiet at night it was almost oppressive. I had always felt a little uneasy in the mansion after dark. There was something about the vastness of it, the way the hallways stretched on endlessly, the feeling of being watched even when no one was around. I tried to focus on my book again, but the image of the blankets lifting wouldn't leave my mind. I glanced at the monitor once more, just to reassure myself that everything was fine, but the screen was still frozen on the image of Mr. Peterson sleeping peacefully. There were no signs of movement, no disturbance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet house. 11:15 p.m., then 11:16. I stood up from the couch and walked to the kitchen, trying to shake the growing sense of unease. I needed something to calm my nerves, so I made a cup of tea. The kettle whistled and the warm steam filled the air as I poured the water into the mug. I sipped slowly, trying to steady my hands, but every time I glanced toward the baby monitor, that image of the blankets lifting replayed in my mind. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something wasn't right. I wandered through the mansion, checking the locks on the doors, making sure everything was as it should be. As I passed by the staircase that led up to Mr. Peterson's room, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. There was no breeze, no open windows, nothing that would explain it. I stopped for a moment, staring up the staircase, but all I saw was the darkened hallway above. Everything was still. Everything was quiet. And yet, something was wrong. I returned to my post in the living room, feeling the weight of the house pressing in on me. The silence had become unbearable. It wasn't normal to be this alone in such a large place. There were sounds, small creaks and groans, that I couldn't explain, like the house itself was alive and breathing in the darkness. I glanced at the monitor again. Mr. Peterson's room was unchanged, but something still felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that I wasn't truly alone. Just as I was about to pick up my book again, the lights flickered. A quick, sharp flicker that lasted only a second, but it was enough to make my pulse quicken. I stood up from the couch and made my way to the hallway, looking up toward the dark staircase. Everything seemed normal again, but the unease in my chest refused to fade. And then, as I stood there, I heard it. A soft thud, followed by another. It was coming from upstairs, from Mr. Peterson's room. I froze. The thuds continued, slow, deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest. I took a deep breath and slowly made my way upstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. I reached the door to Mr. Peterson's room and hesitated before opening it. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing the darkened interior. The room was as I had left it. Mr. Peterson lay in his bed, still asleep. But then I saw it. The blankets, now back in place on the bed, moved again. They twitched, as if something underneath was stirring. I rushed to the side of the bed, my hand trembling as I reached for Mr. Peterson's arm to check on him. He was still sleeping, his breathing steady. But the blankets, they rose once more just as they had before. Gently, slowly, as though an invisible hand was lifting them from the bed. I backed away from the bed, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't just a draft. It wasn't a glitch. Something was in this house with me. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend, my fingers shaking. Something's happening. I don't know what, but I'm scared. The phone buzzed with a reply, "Call the police." I didn't know if it was paranoia or real fear, but I had no intention of staying in that house a moment longer. As I turned to leave the room, I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. When my grandpa was a young man, he worked for the railroad. It was good, honest work, and he made decent money. He wasn't married yet, so he had few obligations beyond the job. Like a lot of young men at that time, he spent his free weekends hanging out with buddies, cruising around in the nice car he had saved up for. He loved going to dances, meeting people, living a little before settling down. One Friday evening, he was headed to a dance in a neighboring town, and as usual, he was running a little late. The sun was low in the sky, casting long orange shadows over the hills. In a hurry, Grandpa decided to take a shortcut, a winding, curvy back road that twisted its way through the countryside. He was speeding a little, maybe more than he should have been, when he crested a hill and was hit straight in the eyes by the setting sun. Blinded for a moment, he could barely make out what looked like a person standing in the middle of the road. He jerked the wheel to avoid hitting them, lost control, and his car flew off the side of the road into a ravine. The world went dark. The next thing he remembered was a voice, young, urgent, and full of concern. Mister, are ya a light?" Grandpa opened his eyes, his head pounding and his knee burning like fire. He couldn't move much, but he was alive. That voice belonged to a pudgy, pale-faced boy with bright red hair and a hairlip that gave his speech a soft, slurred lisp. The boy helped him out of the wrecked car, dug Grandpa's duffel bag from the back seat, and supported him up the embankment to the roadside. Grandpa noticed an old house set back behind a line of trees and asked the boy if that was where he lived. "Yeah," the boy said, nodding. Even though he was hurting, Grandpa couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. The boy seemed nice enough, kind, helpful, maybe a little odd. Grandpa asked if there was a phone he could use to call for help. "No phone," the boy replied. "Are your folks home?" "Nope. Dunno when they'll be back." "How far to the nearest neighbor?" "Last place you passed, with the long white fence." Grandpa remembered that it had to be 6 miles back. He sighed, knowing he wasn't gonna make it that far on foot with a busted knee. "You can come to my house," the boy offered. With the boy's help, Grandpa limped slowly up the long dirt driveway to the worn, sagging house. It looked like it had seen better days. Paint peeling, shutters missing. Still, it was shelter. Inside, the place was cold. Strangely cold for a warm June evening. There was no sign of heating, no furnace, not even a wood stove. But there was a large hearth in the kitchen. Grandpa shivered and asked, "Is the house always this cold?" "I'm a lose cold," the boy said, rubbing his arms. "Well, if you get me some wood, I'll start a fire," Grandpa offered. The boy nodded and quickly returned with an armful of dry wood. Grandpa got a fire going, and soon the flames were crackling. The boy stood almost uncomfortably close to the fire, soaking in the heat, arms wrapped around himself. Grandpa chuckled softly and said, "You better be careful, buddy. You're gonna get burned." "I'm a lose cold," the boy repeated almost to himself. Grandpa reached into his duffel and offered the boy a sandwich. "You hungry?" The boy shook his head. "Already had supper." Grandpa ate quietly while the boy stood there by the fire. Something about the house made Grandpa uneasy. It didn't look lived in. No pictures, no clutter, no warmth beyond the fire they just built. As night settled in, the boy finally turned to him and said, "You couldn't sleep in my bed. I'll keep the fire going." "That's kind of you," Grandpa said. "You sure no one'll be coming by? I'd hate to miss a chance to get a tow. Nobody ever comes up this far. They're scared of the ghosts." Grandpa blinked. "Ghosts?" "Yeah," the boy said casually. "People say this house is haunted, but I never seen nothing. Only thing I'm scared of is nightmares." "Nightmares?" "Yep, same one every night. Big ol' hog chases me, tries to eat me, but I always wake up just in time." Grandpa frowned. "You ever get chased by a pig in real life?" The boy nodded. "Yeah, picked up her baby, made it squeal. She didn't like that. Knocked me down and bit me up real bad." Grandpa figured that explained the dreams. Trauma has a way of seeping into sleep. Before long, Grandpa couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. The fire was warm, his body was sore, and the boy insisted he take the bed. "I'll keep watch," the boy said. Grandpa fell asleep quickly, but not for long. He woke with a jolt, sweating, heart pounding. He'd had the exact nightmare the boy had described. A giant sow charging him, tusks flashing, grunting, closing in. He woke just before it reached him. The room was dim, with only glowing embers in the fireplace. The boy still sat silently nearby, staring into the ashes. The sun was just beginning to rise. Grandpa stepped outside, limping toward the edge of the porch to relieve himself. As he stood there, he heard the faint rumble of a tractor in the distance. With effort, he hobbled into the field and waved his arms until the farmer saw him. The man pulled up in his tractor and looked shocked. "You all right?" he asked. "Yeah," Grandpa said. "Wrecked my car last night. Went off the road just over that hill." The farmer's face changed. "Last night? Where'd you sleep?" Grandpa explained about the boy in the road, the house, the fire, the nightmares. The color drained from the farmer's face. "You slept there?" "Yes, why?" The man shook his head. "I'd heard stories. I never believed them, but I guess I do now." "What stories?" "That boy you met. He died over a year ago, mauled by a sow. It was a horrible thing. Family moved away right after the funeral. Couldn't stand to live there anymore. House has been empty ever since." Grandpa said nothing. He just looked back toward the house, now far behind them, its windows catching the morning light like watching eyes. He never took that road again. You've made it through the hour. The stories are over now, and the night is quiet again. Let the silence soothe you. Whatever followed you from the tales, leave it here. You're safe, you're calm, and you're already drifting deeper into rest. If you enjoyed these stories, consider subscribing to Dark Reddit for more nightly chills. Until next time, sleep well.